This conference is now being recorded.
And welcome to the Respectability webinar for September 7th, 2016. I am absolutely delighted to be here today to talk to you about tapping into hidden human capital, practical solutions for employers and people with disabilities. My name is Philip Polly. I am the Policy and Practices Director for Respectability. I help oversee our outreach to governors and to state leaders. I also present at conferences about workforce topics, and above all, I am out there talking to employers about the value that people with disabilities bring to the workplace and how the bottom line can be benefited by bringing on diverse talent. And I am pleased to share the stage today with a guru, a magnet, a influencer on social media in technology circles by the name of Debra Ruh, CEO of Ruh Global Communications. We're very delighted to be here today. First and foremost, I want to give a huge shout out to JP Morgan Chase. Chase has been a partner in our webinar series. They allow us the flexibility to provide you free learning opportunities online with closed captioning to ensure accessibility for all. We are delighted with their support, and we look forward to offering continuing learning opportunities in the months ahead. So to give you a little background, Debra Ruh is the CEO of Ruh Global Communications, and that's a firm that's focused on global disability inclusion and strategy, accessibility and implementation of the CRPD. And Debra is the proud mother of an adult child with Down syndrome. If you don't follow the Ruh family on social media, I encourage you to do so. They're thoughtful, they're funny, they bring really great insight to a lot of challenges and opportunities. Debra is also a member of the G3 ICT expert panel, the advisory board, and the co-founder of the #AXSChat, the #2 Twitter chat in the world. She helped found Tec-Access in 2001 before it was merged with SSB in 2011. Tec-Access was a US-based multi-million-dollar firm focused on the accessibility of internet and communications technology. Over 80% of her team were actually technologists with disabilities. She is the author of 2 books. She's an influencer on social media, and today we're going to be talking about her second book, Tapping into Hidden Human Capital. I just finished reading it. I was blown away, even as somebody who's been working on disability employment for a while. It's funny, it's valuable, it's really insightful. And so, Debra, I turn the floor over to you. Take it away.
Thank you, Philip. I must say that's the best introduction I've ever gotten before, so I'm glad it's recorded. I'm going to have to, when I get depressed, I'll listen to it. So well done, well done. So thank you, Philip and Jennifer and the entire Respectability team for everything you're doing, but also for allowing me to talk about this topic. Very, very important topic, and near and dear to my heart. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on the webinar today as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and begin. So, Philip was kind enough to share who was attending the conference, and I know that hopefully Paul Albano, from Canon joined us because he was Canon is one of the case studies that's in the book. So very exciting when corporations join these. But I will say that some of the information that I'm going to be sharing with a lot of you on the call, I think I'll be preaching to the choir a little bit, as we often do when we're talking about these topics. But generally, who I talk to is corporations and employers. And so you'll understand why some of the data that I include in the PowerPoint presentation has been included, even though a lot of you might know some of this data. I find that employers often don't know the data, so it's very important to sort of set the stage of what we're talking about. I will also say that when I wrote the book, I've been in the field, as Philip said, for many years. I was in the banking industry before I joined the field, and my daughter really inspired me because I kept being told that she pretty much added no value to society, and she certainly would add no value to the workforce. And I was puzzled by that because I thought she was a very talented, funny, interesting young woman, and I disagreed. I really thought that she could add a lot of value. And so that's one reason why I just jumped in and said, this is ridiculous. She and her peers add a lot of value to the workforce. And so I wrote the book from an employer's perspective, and that I could tell there hasn't been a lot written from the employer's perspective. Let's take some of the mystery out of this. What do we need to do, if you're an employer, to really, truly hire and retain talented people with disabilities in your workforce? And I'll just make a note that this book got edited so many times because T3ICT has affiliations with the United Nations, and it got edited. And a couple of editors would say, why do you keep saying qualified candidates with disabilities or talented people with disabilities? And the reason why, they said that's redundant. You don't need that in the book. But I actually feel we do need that in the book, because often I think our community accidentally says to employers, you should hire us, for people with disabilities, you should hire us. And instead of saying we are a talented group of people. And I know one of the listeners that we were speaking to before it started is a screen reader user. Well, there's a lot of value to the workforce to employing somebody that uses a screen reader. You can learn so much about the way you do business with your customers, how you're interacting with your customers online and offline by employing somebody that is a screen reader user. So we still sometimes have to take the content and bring it down to a level that we all understand. And that, I just really wanted to focus on the reasons why people with disabilities really, truly do add value to the workforce. So on this first screen, I talk about the number of people with disabilities and that the numbers are on the rise for a lot of reasons. The technological advances, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the presentation, but the world is being changed because of the way technology is being brought into the world. There's still a lot of work to do, but there are some very exciting things, especially for people with disabilities with technological advances. At the same time, I'm going to jump down my slide, this also can cause more of a problem with the digital divide. And if we don't have access to technology, or we can't find employment because our screen readers or our assistive technology doesn't work with the assistive technology being used by employers, then it's a failure for all of us. So globalization is changing things. Countries that are taking major steps to ensure the rights of people with disabilities, and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which unfortunately the United States has not ratified. There's only 3 countries that have not signed and ratified, and unfortunately the United States is one of them. And maybe because of our amazing Americans with Disabilities Act, but still, Americans with disabilities actually leave the United States every day, and when you leave the United States, you're no longer protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I, like many people at Respectability, believe that we should lead and ratify the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. This is also about corporate social responsibilities. These companies, CSR, corporate social responsibility, has become more and more important to American corporations as well as global corporations, because a lot of Americans lost faith in a lot of our corporations during the financial crisis. And so corporations want us all to believe that they're doing the right thing by our communities and by their employees and by their clients. And so corporate social responsibility has become very important. And one way that you can prove that you really care about corporate social responsibility is to make sure you're hiring a diverse workforce that includes individuals with disabilities. So a slide that I like to show, I do a lot of global presentations, so you'll see that if you can see in this particular slide, and if you can't, you have an advantage because we tagged every one of these pictures so that this presentation would be accessible. So any screen reader, people can actually, users can actually go in and see who some of these people are on the slide. But I once again try to make the impression that people with disabilities are people. And if you think as an employer that you do not have individuals with disabilities working for your corporation or your organization today, there's a problem on a lot of levels. But I promise you, you do have people with disabilities already working for you. But why they do not feel comfortable disclosing that they have a disability, because many disabilities, of course, are invisible disabilities, then you have a problem in your workforce. So I like to put out this wonderful list of faces and names because what do they have in common? all of these individuals have disabilities. A lot of people don't realize that Agatha Christie, a very beloved author, had dysgraphia, which prevents any understood or legible work unless she couldn't write it down. She actually had somebody had to dictate her work and type it in for her. And a lot of people don't realize that. And, you know, what a loss if we didn't have the work of Agatha Christie because her disability prevented her from writing. Wouldn't that be a shame? I don't want to go over all of the names, all of the pictures on here, but we have the former Indonesian president was blind. We have Michael J. Fox. We have Stevie Wonder. We have Beethoven. We have Stephen Hawkins, Marley Matlin, and all of these individuals. We have Sir Richard Branson, who has dyslexia and actually really struggled during his education, but now is one of the wealthiest men in the world and a very well-known entrepreneur and philanthropist. So taking any of these people, and some of these are actresses in India and very well-beloved people from all over the world, it would be a shame for any one of these people to have not been fully included in the professions that they chose, because they all in their own way have changed the world. So I like to do a place setting when I'm talking about people with disabilities, because I think often employers think I'm just talking about somebody like my daughter that was born with Down syndrome, or somebody that's in a wheelchair, or maybe somebody that's blind, when in actuality the World Health Organization says 1 in 7 people have a disability, and in the United States, 1 in 5 people have identified with a disability, according to our Census Bureau. So the numbers are large and staggering. So we know for sure there is no significant difference between the productivity of people with disabilities against people without disabilities, particularly if we provide people with the assistive technology or the accommodations that they need. I have a picture here of my former partner, Bob English, who was a person with a disability, and Rosemary Musacchio, who is my Chief Accessibility Officer. Rose was born with cerebral palsy, and Rose cannot speak, and there's a lot of things Rose can't do. When she lies flat, Rose can only blink her eyes. But I'd rather talk to you about what Rose can do. She is one of the most talented technologists that I've ever met in my life. She's very funny. She's really good writer. She's a brilliant web developer. There's just so much that she can do, and she's actually leaving today to go on a trip with her girlfriends to Amsterdam. So, Rose belongs in the world, and she has a place to play in the world, and she is contributing great things. So I'm really proud that she has been an employee of mine for many years, and I consider her a partner. So the book, as Philip so eloquently said, is called Tapping into Hidden Human Capital: How Leading Corporations Leverage Multiple Abilities in Their Workforce. It was very important to me that I not address this just from a United States presence, even though I'm very proud to be an American and I live in Virginia. I wanted to look at it from a global perspective, because many of the corporations that I work with are multinational corporations, and I often will see that a corporation will be making efforts to employ people with disabilities in the United States or in Europe, but they won't be doing it in Egypt or Oman or in other countries. And even though we got a ton of work to do with employment here in the United States, we actually, in some cases, are ahead of other countries where people with disabilities have no rights. They have no rights to go to school. They have no rights to go into a restaurant. So in a lot of ways, we're ahead, even though I think we have a tremendous amount of work to do with employment. So the book is available on Amazon and on some other channels, and it is about to be available on Kindle so that we can have an accessible version of it. But for some reason, it's been a long time coming. So hopefully that'll be out in the next couple of weeks. I keep sending notes to my sub-publisher. I have my publisher, G3 ICT, and then we used another publisher behind them. But I'm still only available in print copy, but we're working on the accessible version. So All right, so I've already talked a little bit about this, but once again, I wrote it from the employer's perspective. I wanted to help employers understand. And if you're a service provider and you work with employers trying to get people with disabilities employed, I have a few slides at the end of it on my presentation specifically for service providers and both rehabilitation experts that are working with people to get employed. But it's just very important to use language that are really understood and that that corporations understand. We need to make sure we're speaking the same languages. So I wanted to tell the stories of corporations that were leveraging multiple abilities in the workforce. And I very deliberately didn't use big disability words. I wanted to use hidden human capital, tapping into human capital, because to me, the conversation has got to be now about, the talents that people with disabilities bring to the workforce. We know this for sure now. The discussion of should we employ people with disabilities, that's gone. This is more about, yes, of course you should. Are you crazy? Of course you should employ people with disabilities. Sorry, not to make a mental health thing, but so it's about what corporations are doing it, because corporations are very competitive with each other. So if, like Chase Mortgage, who is, Chase, who is sponsoring the webinar today, we know that they're doing wonderful things to include people with disabilities and support organizations that are helping people with disabilities, like Respectability. So their competitors notice when we brag about them in the market. So it's important to talk about what others are doing so others will follow through on it. It's important to understand, as already stated, that you already have employees with disabilities working for you. Let's get out the Americans with Disabilities Act and look at the definition. You definitely have already employed people with disabilities. Now, why don't you pick it up a little bit more so that you can accommodate them, understand what your risks are, make sure you create a strategic plan and a roadmap to think about all the moving parts associated with fully including and accommodating and retaining individuals with disabilities, and understanding that all of these efforts that you make actually add benefit to the rest of your employees and your clients as well, because accessibility is for everyone. So I wanted to talk about it from the employer's perspective, but I wanted to help them understand that this accessibility is a big part of this. I was speaking in Chicago at a conference, and somebody said, well, what's my first step? Just start hiring people with disabilities? And that's a great step. But the reality is, if you are a corporation in the United States, there's a lot of ways that you can get in trouble. And we know that the Americans with Disability lawsuits are up over these specific issues by 63% from a year ago. 63%, and we expect those lawsuits are going to continue to rise. EEOC complaints, ADA complaints, your website's not accessible to me, your environment's not accessible, you're not accommodating me. All of those lawsuits are on the rise, and we expect that they're going to continue to rise. And I will just say that often when I'm out of the country, people will say, you Americans, and I know they're about to take a dig at our country, and they'll say, your lawsuits, you're always suing each other. And it's like, well, you know what? The reality is we legislated first with our Americans with Disability Act. We do a lot of litigation. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. It's just the way we do it. But actually, a lot of other countries are benefiting from the activities that are happening right here. It might be sometimes very uncomfortable, but the reality is a lot of other countries benefit from the way we do things here in the United States. So this is also about marketing, because I want to support, as a family that has multiple members that have disabilities, including both of my parents became disabled as they aged. I want to know that you're a company that includes us in your marketing. So it's becoming more and more important. And Tommy Hilfiger recently did a program with adaptive clothing. It was their best online campaign ever. Sold out, all those clothes sold out in 7 days. The very best, most effective one they've ever had. So those are the kind of stories when we're talking about marketing. And I'll talk more about marketing a little bit more. As Philip mentioned, I'm very active on social media, maybe too active, but I love social media. So the goals of the book, I've already talked a lot about it, was making sure that employers understood about benefits of hiring and retaining persons with disabilities, understanding the talents we bring to the table, understanding how it allows you to expand the global demand for the workforce, understanding the risk, the global carrot and sticks, changing your organization to an inclusion culture. When you make the efforts to employ people with disabilities in your workforce, that is going to help you with other diversity segments, as well as the regular, as well as all of the other regular efforts that you're making to employ anybody with or without a disability. Remembering that it's also about retention. A lot of people, only about 20% of the population are born with a disability, like my daughter. 80% of us acquire disabilities as we live our life. So this is about retention. Joe, became blind because he had a stroke or he had macular degeneration. He's worked with the company for 20 years. He has wonderful information that you don't want to lose. So you work with this employee to make sure that they can continue to contribute, and they almost always want to continue to contribute. It's about universal design and accessibility for all of us. It's about unrecognized market opportunities. It's about technology and employability. And of course, it's a global success story when people with disabilities are more meaningfully included. So when I was writing the book, and I have a picture, I'm a typical mom, I'm going to find a way to put a picture of my daughter in here. But this was the first book signing that I did at the enabling event. And the gentleman that we're signing it for is actually a gentleman with severe disabilities that works in Qatar or Qatar, and works at the MATA AT Center. So I have the pleasure to meet all these talented, amazing individuals with disabilities through my work. But when an employer is thinking about this, you can't think about it just from the HR perspective. You have to understand that this involves the entire enterprise. The C-suite and the board of directors have a role to play in making sure that we all feel that you are doing your corporate responsibility, social responsibility, but also to reduce the risk and make sure all of your employees are accommodated and that you are considered a world-class employer and you're including everyone. So HR does have a very important role, and diversity rolls up into HR sometimes, and diversity is part of this. IT plays a major role, including, don't forget, your customer service, your technical support. All of that has to be accessible. Your intranet has to be accessible. All the software systems you use have to be accessible. Your website has to be accessible. Your mobile technology has to be accessible. So there's a lot of moving parts. Marketing I talked about a little bit, but don't put out marketing for any of us that isn't accessible to all of us. And if you're going to be using models in marketing, please also include models that have, in this case, physical disabilities, so we can see that they have disabilities and that you've actually considered us. Sales and business development have a place to play in this, because this is a way to differentiate yourself against your competitors that are not including people with disabilities. Remember the numbers, 1 in 5 people have a disability, or according to the National Organization on Disability, 1 in 3 families are impacted in the U.S. 1 in 3 families have a family member, a sibling, a child, a parent, or a friend that have disabilities. And so this is a wonderful market to tap into. You have to make sure the training is fully accessible. You should be considering all this when you're doing product development of your services and products. Are they accessible? You need to be training your customer service reps to make sure that they know how to accommodate customers with disabilities in the stores and electronically. And procurement has a very big part to play as well. I often tell these corporations, make sure that when you're procuring anything to do with built-in barriers or ICT accessibility, that you have a clause in there that says it will be fully accessible. That way, if your vendor provides you with a website that's not accessible, you can go back and say, I told you it had to be accessible. Procurement is one of the best things that we can do in large corporations, in education, government, contracting, to help us move this forward. And we're seeing a lot of corporations be real role models with this. IBM has done a good job with this. Microsoft has done it. When they put out their procurements for any type of technology, I always say it has to be accessible. So if we push it into procurement, a lot of work will be done because I want to do business with, for example, the United States government because they're one of the largest purchasers in the world. So if they say, we'll do business with you, but if we select you, everything has to be accessible to everybody, including people with disabilities, we get a lot accomplished. And of course, operations there are a lot of parts to play in operations through the entire organization. How are you, once again, how are the teams being put together? Future of work comes into this. And I dig into this a lot more into the book. The book is a fast read. We did large print and it's a fast read. It's not a very big book. When I first wrote the book, it was 15 chapters and it would make a loud thud if it hit the table. And my publisher said, Debra, people are not going to take the time to read this much content. And so we whittled it down till we just really got to the point, which sometimes I'm not as good about that. But so I appreciated the kind comments Philip made earlier on about the book. So, all right. So myths about employment of persons with disabilities. And one of my clients is Georgia Tech's AMAC program. They have a wonderful program at AMAC, and so they kindly provided the pictures to this. And they've also done a free MOOC, massive online course on ICT Accessibility. If you want to know more about that, let us know and we'll get you a link to the course, and it's free. It's a 6-week free course that you can take. And so I believe most of you know this data. Myths when it comes to people with disabilities do not have the talent and skills needed in business. We know for sure this is not true. And some of the reports that have been done by states, by Respectability, it has amazing content in there. So if you're not tracking some of the work that Respectability is doing when it comes to, marketing, and they've been a, big voice behind some of the shows like Born This Way, which is my favorite show. A lot of the work that they're doing with the candidates to make sure that, we can all vote and that the candidates care about making sure we're included. It's very impressive. And when you're talking to employers, you want this good content to show that, by the way, 11% of this year's college graduates had disabilities. And those are just the ones that self-identified. So myth that people with disabilities leave jobs more frequently than workers without disabilities. Absolutely not true. We're finding an unemployment, the turnover rate is less than 6%. Is it because not all employers understand the value of employing people with disabilities? Maybe, but the reality is we know that these myths are untrue. That people with disabilities have a higher than average absentee rate, and your workers' comp claims will increase, or you won't be able to get insurance. Not true. As Philip mentioned in my introduction, I ran TecAccess for many years, multi-million-dollar business. 80% of my team were people with all kinds of different disabilities. I did not find that I had no problem getting insurance. I had no problem getting coverage. My insurance that I had to pay for my employees was no more with the employees with disabilities than it was without disabilities, which actually surprised me. So we have the data to prove a lot of these myths are not true, and I cover a lot more of the myths in the book as well. So market opportunities. I pulled up a few really cool ads that we've been seeing. We've been seeing a lot of really cool ads that are coming during the Super Bowl, and the Comcast ad that's up here. It's a beautiful, if you haven't seen the Comcast ad where the young girl that was born blind gives us her vision of what The Wizard of Oz, her favorite movie, is. It's a beautiful commercial and touching and warm. And I know sometimes people with disabilities will say, we don't want to be your inspirational porn. And I get that. But at the same time, corporations need to understand that we do want to be included. So we need to be careful that there's a balance there. So I think the ads that I'm including on this slide, I have a picture of a Coca-Cola can where it is in Braille. I've got Toyota ads. I have one with Amy Purdy, who I just think is an amazing, talented woman, Paralympic a champion on Dancing with the Stars. It's a guilty pleasure Sara and I have. We love that show. And then AT&T, and AT&T's done amazing things. So this is just a few examples, Coca-Cola, Toyota, Comcast, and AT&T, that are making efforts to include us. And I can do a presentation on all of the brands that are actually including us now. Microsoft, I mentioned Tommy Hilfiger, there's just so many more. This is just a few examples. So helping these employers understand there are positive brand consequences by including us is important. I'm missing this a little bit, but also understanding the risk and the touch points. And so the reality is anytime when I'm talking to corporations, anytime technology and human beings come together, that's a touch point that could cause accessibility issues for your customers. And this is not just for your customers with disabilities. This is for your customers that are older. This is for your customers that English might be their second language. This is all of us. This is your customers that multitask. And I have a slide I use in another presentation where it talks about, all of a sudden I'm in a situation where there's too much light hitting my computer and I can't see the screen. Well, that's how it is sometimes for a person that's visually impaired or blind. I'm in a situation where somebody's making a lot of noise, maybe they're doing road work. I can't hear you as well, or I'm in a busy call center. And so understanding that all the work that you do benefits all of us, not just individuals with disabilities. So you have to consider your websites, your internet, your mobile apps, your HR processes, your systems, most of these things I already talked about. But also your customer statements. There's privacy statements you send out to us. You have to send us those and your proxy statements. Those have to be accessible too. And we're actually starting to see lawsuits because privacy statements aren't accessible and proxies aren't accessible if you own stocks and shares in companies. And mobile applications are starting now to get lawsuits filed against them because mobile apps aren't accessible to all of us. And I already mentioned the importance of procurement. So these are just a few examples of the touch points, and I go into them a little bit more depth in the book. So I mentioned how technology, and I love technology, is changing the world. The robotics. I have a picture up here of a man he was one of them that part of his face was transplanted. People have actually had some transplants, face transplants. It's just amazing what medical technology is doing for us now. The wearables, the Internet of Things, the smart cities, the driverless cars. I was driving down Virginia Highway the other day, and this woman was weaving. Well, I didn't know if it was a woman, but it was a woman, and she was weaving. And I thought, what are you doing? And as I got closer to get away from her, she was changing her shirt, going 65 miles per hour down the road. And I thought, you need a driverless car bad. Don't change your clothes going down the expressway. But so ICT is changing the world. Often when I talk to service providers, though, it's just so important that when you're talking to employers, you use the right language. Avoid using fear-based language like litigation, lawsuit, compliance and legislation. Do you have any barriers to employment? It's the right thing to do. Because all of those things actually can have negative connotations. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm telling you, you're going to miss out if you are not including these talented employees with disabilities in your workforce. You're missing out on innovation. You're missing out on creativity. So it's not the right thing to do, but if you don't do it, your competitors are going to do it. So you also have to be careful with words like job carving or sharing, supported employment, sheltered workshops. We know a lot of this, but I think sometimes still when you're coming at this perspective from a service provider, there seems to be a disconnect about the language that we're using with employers. You need to go in there and say, are you looking to hire talented employees? Boy, do I have a bunch of qualified resumes for you from individuals with disabilities. So we have to make sure we're using the right language. And here are some examples of language. And my daughter, Sara, she's worked for Nordstrom. She's been an employee for Nordstrom for over 10 years. And boy, they love her. She gets wonderful job when they do her job reviews, she gets really high marks. The customers love her. Her team members love her. She adds a lot of value to Nordstrom's, and so they're really lucky to have her. So business language qualified candidates is a good fit for the employers. This is also about retention, solid return on investment. It supports your shareholders and the goals that they have for you being, a corporate responsible organization. It helps support your employer choice initiatives. Once again, CSR, but also your employees should look like your client and your customer base. A great example of that is with Disney. Disney is really good about understanding that they have a diverse crowd that comes, and they want to make sure that, that their employees and their clients look the same. I've mentioned Canon before. Canon's the best practice in the book, and I've been working with Canon for years, but a story I tell in the book, and I'll just tell it briefly here, is that Canon has always been very socially responsible about the environment. And so they also really care about the client needs. And about 8 or 10 years ago, they decided that they were going to take the cameras that consumers were buying and they would send them back for repairs. And before, they were just thrown away in the landfill. And they thought, we want to do a better job with this. So what they did was they created a small team of about 20 individuals with disabilities working with a service provider, and they taught them to dismantle these cameras and figure out what parts were really broken and then needed to be responsibly gotten rid of, which ones could be refurbished, which ones could be recycled, which ones could be, actually it was still good, it could be used another way. Well, the good news is this little unit saved them $19 million the first year, which is great. But an even more important story to this is that overall, that plant of about 7,000 people outside Chicago in Naperville, Illinois, the productivity across the board went up 36%. Well, that got their corporate attention. Remember the bottom line, the return on investment? Because they couldn't figure out why this one plant had such a productivity gain. The only thing that was different was a small group of individuals with disabilities that were working for Canon. And they started interviewing a lot of different employees, and the employees said things like, I'm really proud to work for Canon, and I like going to lunch with Joe with Down syndrome, and he's eating lunch with me, and it makes me really proud that you understand the value that these individuals bring to our workforce. And when Americans, and this happens all over the world, we're more proud, we're more productive. So that's really good for the bottom line. So telling stories like that help convince these corporations that you really do want to do a better job of including people with disabilities, retaining people with disabilities, and accommodating the people with disabilities that probably are already working for you. So I have a lot of other stories like that in the book. So this is about seamless integration, making sure that persons with disabilities are seamlessly included in your workforce, in your operations, in your marketing, the accessibility of your products, and that that you're doing it for a lot of different reasons. It's good for your bottom line. It makes good financial sense. It's good to have a diverse, innovative, creative, productive workforce. So it's seamless and it's good for everyone. And I always try to remind employers that societies function better when everyone is given the opportunity to contribute and participate. Often, people with disabilities are, were the bunt of all of the jokes. We've seen that recently with some of the political things. But the worst thing you can say about a candidate is that she looks like she has Down syndrome, like my daughter. That recently was done, and I had something to say about that on social media. But, we're tired of being the bunt of the jokes. People with disabilities absolutely add value to society and the workforce. And I'm hoping that this little book, just will help prove that. This is one of my favorite slides, and it was super fun making it accessible, but it's accessible all the way through. So these are just some examples of corporations all over the world that are including people with disabilities in their workforce. They're making effort. None of them are perfect because we don't even know what perfect means, but all of these employers have actually hired people with disabilities. They have programs to make sure their work is accessible. They're including us in different ways. So just a few of them. I'm going to give Chase a call out because they're supporting this webinar in respectability, and we appreciate that. Bank of America, Accenture, Atos, Microsoft, TD Bank, Woolworths. Do y'all remember Woolworths? They're still in Australia, and they have a really cool campaign going out there for years at employing individuals with intellectual disabilities like my daughter in Woolworths. Ernst & Young, who is going to be on a webinar, I believe the next webinar, or one of the upcoming webinars, and Philip will tell you about them, have done amazing work. Barclays Bank, Marriott, IBM, Amazon. Amazon's doing wonderful work. And once again, none of these corporations are perfect, but they're all trying. And I personally think as an individual, as a family member my family is impacted by disabilities, I look for the corporations that support my community. When we were talking about who are you voting for, I'm going to vote for the candidate that's going to take care of people with disabilities. And I usually don't pick one candidate over another, but I have actually picked a candidate this time, and I won't be obnoxious and tell you who, but you can see it on my tweets at Debra Ruh. But I'm voting based on the candidate that's going to do the right thing by my family. And that's the way I vote. I vote on the issues. I don't vote party lines. I vote based on the issues and on the candidate. So I think this is a powerful slide, and I could really add so many more logos to this slide, but this is a good start to show you progress that's being made. I want to be conscious of the time to give Philip time. AXSChat. Philip mentioned this before. It's AXSChat. We are so stoked about the success we're having with this AXSChat. We are the second largest tweet chat in the world, and we are talking about disability inclusion and empowerment of people with disabilities and accessibility. And we're the second biggest in the whole world. It's incredible. We do it every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are a global chat, so we make sure that we want Europe and the UK and the Middle East, as many countries as possible, Latin America, all of North America. We want everybody to be able to be on here. And in the near future, Jennifer, the CEO of Respectability, is going to be featured on AXSChat. And a few chats ago, we featured one of her board members, the Honorable Tony Coella, who I'm a huge fan of, and Hillary Clinton's team actually joined the tweet and tweeted multiple times, which showed us that they care about people with disabilities. So I was very grateful for that. But on that particular one chat, there were 7 million people that were tweeting, or it fell into their feed. So it's a pretty powerful chat. I have a picture of Carolyn Gehrig, who lives in the United States, and she's terminally ill, and she's been in the hospital a lot, and she's the founder of #HospitalGlam, where she takes the time to take pictures in different hospital settings and procedure settings, just to remind the medical personnel she's an individual. She matters. She's not a patient. She's an individual. And so we had a beautiful tweet chat with her, and we have had leaders from all over the world and individuals with disabilities and ambassadors, and we've been doing it since November 2013, every single Tuesday. So it's a very powerful thing, and we've had actors with disabilities on there, and if you have any ideas of guests, we're booked all the way to, I think, January now, but we're always looking for new guests. I also have a radio program called Human Performance at Work that I talk about these subjects as well, and I'm a blogger for Huffington Post. So very important that our voices be heard on all these different mediums. So what's around the corner? I believe people with disabilities are gaining recognition as a very important market. And I think it's only going to be strengthened. If you're not on social media, I encourage you to get on social media. Our voices need to be heard on social media. We need to talk. We need to support each other. I know that Respectability holds a chat I think it's every week now, after or right before Born This Way is on. And join chats like that. Join us. The more we're on there, the more our voices will be heard. You know, recognize corporations like Canon that are doing the right thing. We need to make sure that accessible technology is available to everyone that needs it, and that that these individuals get it as soon as they get in school, so they can be as productive and the best person they can be. And also, it's important to understand, as we talked about in the presentation, that we'll add more value the more we're included, and the more the technology continues to be enhanced, and the more we make sure that things are accessible, and the more the employers talk about their talented individuals that work for them that have disabilities. So I'm excited about the possibilities and what's around the corner. So here is my contact information, and I know that I wanted to leave some time for questions, and Philip's going to help me with that. But you know, join me on social media. I'm on pretty much every single channel: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm sort of a social media crazy person. I just love social media. Here is all my contact information, my website, and I really believe that we all add value by being included. And I use the word crazy. I guess I shouldn't, but I myself suffer. I have to manage depression. I have depression a lot, and to try to manage that. And I have been diagnosed with ADHD, so I'm a person with invisible disabilities, but they've certainly never stood in my way. I think they've made me a more powerful person. But I've had to learn to manage it, just like, I mean, this is part of being a human being. We all have, abilities and disabilities. It's just part of being an individual. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Philip, so that, and thanks for sharing my Huffington Post blog, Philip. But
you're very welcome, Debra. I seriously encourage our listeners to check out your blog, to learn more about inclusive employers, to take that MOOC about accessibility online. As Debra mentioned, every week before the TV show Born This Way, we have a Twitter chat starting at 9 p.m. Tuesday nights. Hashtag Born This Way. You can also watch the amazing, groundbreaking Emmy-nominated show Born This Way on A&E Networks at 10 p.m. Tuesday nights. It's a great show, as she mentions, and it features a cast of young people, their loves and their lives, and they also happen to be people with Down syndrome. So we've got two avenues for our audience to ask questions. If you're joining us online, you can go to the chat box, type out your question, I'll read it out so we can share and have a conversation together. If you're on the phone, Virginia, would you please explain how people can ask a question by phone?
Participants who have dialed in on the phone can press 7#, that's 7, followed by the pound sign on their telephone keypad to indicate they'd like their line unmuted. That's 7# on the telephone keypad.
Well, while people are getting their questions together, Debra, I want to ask you, first and foremost, so suppose an employer, kind of gets it and they decide, all right, we want to start hiring people with disabilities. Where could they go to get some resources to understand how to become an inclusive workplace, to have an accommodation process? What resources would you recommend an employer start with to understand how to hire diverse talent with disabilities?
Well, I think there's some really good places to go, and I see that you had shared in the message window some of the USBLN's work. I was a board member for many years with them, and they're www.usbln.org. And you also have Ask Jan, which is a treasure when it comes to individuals with disabilities and employers. If you have any questions about accommodations, or how, you have a situation where you're not exactly sure how to accommodate, a person that's coming for an interview, it's a wonderful resource. Respectability, I know that we're on this webinar, but they have a ton of good content out there. I've used a bunch of their numbers, and I know that I'm in Virginia, and I remember that they did a bunch of reports on what was happening in Virginia with employment and, the work, this shortage and all the different laws and stuff that were changing. I found it so valuable, and I shared a lot of that good content with employers. And they did it for every single state. It's really powerful information. And what I find, I come from corporate America. I worked for big banks before I became an entrepreneur, but we live and breathe numbers. And so to be able to have statistics by these different states, as well as national statistics, that I'm not just talking out of the side of my mouth. We know that this information is here, just the sheer numbers and the sheer opportunities. So I think respectability, and that's one reason why I'm an advisor, because I really believe in the work that they're doing. And I like that they have fellows with disabilities and interns with disabilities. So they're really walking the walk, which is very important to me.
And staff members with disabilities.
And staff members, right. So, it's such a great best practice. They're not just saying, oh, do this. They're doing it. And they're proving that the talent is there. And so I really believe in supporting organizations like that. You have a lot of other organizations, the International Labor Organization, if you're looking at this globally, you have, there's just so many good organizations in the United States now. The National Organization on Disabilities is another place, AARP, the Association of So the Association of Retired Persons has some really good content out there, especially when it comes to individuals acquiring disabilities as we age. So that sometimes people are like, I'm not sure if we're going to hire, somebody with Down syndrome. It's like, okay, if you think that's all this topic's about, you're totally missing the point. Because it's not just about, a person with an intellectual disability. This is about people. So you really have to think about this. So that's a few, and I could think of a whole bunch more. The ADA centers that are in every single state. You have, ADA centers. You have the IAAP, the Accessibility Professionals Organization, G3 ICT. There's so many good ones.
Definitely. Virginia, do we have any questions on the phone?
No, at this time.
Chat box question.
Philip, there's a comment here that Grant made that said, I set up a North Carolina Digital Divide Leap workspace and PODIO and my Open Strategic Innovation design. So, and Grant said he would be happy to share it. And I think that's one thing we need to do. We need to share with each other. So here's an example, and I don't know if Grant could give us a link to that or provide a link to you, Philip, but I think a lot of stuff is being done here, and we need to share with each other because it doesn't take one of us. If there's only one person at the top talking about this, we're all going to lose. We need hundreds and millions of people talking about this, which is why I think social media is so important. I didn't know if you'd seen that, Philip, so I wanted to make sure we pointed that out.
No, I didn't, and I put my email address in the chat earlier. I seriously encourage people to follow up with any questions they don't ask now. So I am curious. Debra, you mentioned, disclosing your own, challenges and issues with ADD and depression. So I'm curious, do you have any advice for employees who may have disabilities but may not be open about it? The fear of stigma is a very powerful one, and we're working to overcome it, but what advice do you have for employees or people who are trying to get into the workforce about disclosure or talking about accommodations? How can people be their best self-advocates?
And that's such a great question. And so, my whole life, I have struggled with depression. And I sometimes think most people must have some depression, only because that's my reality. But I did not talk about it for a really long time. And I always knew that I was super high strung and that it's actually been good for my career, but I have a problem calming down. And that's sometimes not good for my depression. And I finally occurred to me that I should actually be talking about it, because for a long time I didn't talk about it because I felt like it wasn't fair to people like Rosemary, my partner, that has a more severe disability than I do. I thought maybe I take something away from her. And then I realized Well, that's not true, because we are individuals and we all have challenges. I think that's part of being alive. And so the more we talk about it and say, wow, well, if Debra could disclose that and be who she is, maybe I can do that. And the reality is sometimes people will be prejudiced against us, and you might not get the job. But the thing is, do you really want to work for a company that doesn't get the talents you bring to the table? And I know that's easier said than done. The segment on my podcast this week, I talked to a very talented man with a visible disability that did everything we told him to do. He did the internships. He got a degree. He is a good communicator. He, did an advocacy, and he could not get a job. And I'm sorry, but I think it's because he's in a scooter. I really do, and I'm sorry to say that. But I know there's a lot of people that aren't disabled that can't find jobs, but I still think there's a lot that's happening. But I think that we each have to have the responsibility of owning who we are and talking about it in whatever way makes the most sense to us, to continue to dispel these ridiculous myths that are going on about people with disabilities not adding value to the workforce and society in general. So great question, Philip.
Virginia, do we have any phone questions? I guess not.
Philip, there's one more that Terrell, while you're talking, Terrell mentioned being really interested in learning more about corporate social responsibility and the tools and to better embrace the employer and the local community. I'm happy to share content like that. The corporate social responsibility is starting to get a lot of attention by the C-suite, which I thought was interesting because I thought, they weren't really paying attention to it. They really are. And so one thing that I'm happy to do is share information. We'll look at any questions that came up, and I'll share it with Philip, and then Philip can share it with the people that signed up. But if you have other questions you want to send to me or to Philip provided his email address. We're here to help you guys. We really want you to be successful with this. So please feel free to use this as a resource. And sorry to interrupt you, Philip. Just want to make sure that you knew about that one.
Great, definitely. And my email is philipp@respectabilityusa.org. Debra's email is debra@ruhglobal.com. The links are both in the PowerPoint. Virginia, were there any last phone questions?
No questions.
All right. Well, first and foremost, I just want to express my deep thanks to Debra for doing this webinar with us today. She is doing some amazing work. Is really a cutting-edge leader and a wonderful mother and a really example and inspiration to us all. Thank you so much for joining us. As we said, we are available for questions via email, via phone. And I want to kind of pivot a little bit and kind of talk about what's coming up next for Respectability's webinar series. We have done a lot over the summer talking about state VR programs and employer partnerships. However, we're kind of pivoting a little bit and kind of ranging the topics a little more broadly coming up. So in a few weeks' time, we're actually going to be doing a webinar about Montgomery County, Maryland. Join us on Wednesday, October 5th at 1:30 p.m. for a webinar being presented by Trish Galley, the chair of the Montgomery County Commission on People with Disabilities. And we're actually looking at this as a model of how local leadership can really be hugely impactful on jobs for people with disabilities. Did you know in Montgomery County, they have over a 50% employment rate for people with disabilities, and they're doing it through a lot of partnerships, a lot of collaborative work, and we're going to be talking about that on October 5th. We're also going to be talking about microfinance and microlending as a different kind of model for supporting people with disabilities. I'm pleased to be joined on Tuesday, October 18th by Jill Crosser, the Executive Director of the Iowa ABLE Foundation. She's going to be talking about what they're doing to support the financial security of Iowans with disabilities through microlending and supporting entrepreneurship. And then we've got more topics on the pipeline, but coming up in November, I'm really excited about Tuesday, October 22nd, when we're going to be joined by Lori Golden, who is going to be talking about what Ernst & Young is doing around combating the stigma of mental illness and addiction. So we've got some very diverse topics coming up, some really great speakers. Lastly, I just want to extend again my deep thanks to JP Morgan Chase for all of the support they've provided us. They allow us to offer these free webinars to you, to share these learning opportunities. Lastly, here is our contact information. We'll be happy to follow up with any questions or resources or comments, and just let us know how we can help you. And that's it for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us.